Good afternoon and most welcome to Heidegger 976. We have a very lovely afternoon here. Gothenburg has experienced at least 3 weeks of rather bad weather and no highlights to speak of. But now it seems to the high pressure has come here to stay for a while. I would guess there would be at least 17, 18 degrees now, and for me standing in the sun it feels even warmer. I will take up an article today recommended to me by my dear colleague Kalle Lundahl, and it's written by a Turkish professor, Meliz Ergin, which is in itself very unusual. And to make it even more unusual, it is going to Derrida and a special quote from Derrida. In the beginning, this is from Meliz Ergin's article, and I will read directly out of the paper. When asked to classify his writings under the domain of a single genre, Derrida refers us to the loosely defined notion of autobiography. This essay examines the autobiographical thread in Derrida's work to elaborate on the twin problem of identity and writing. The purpose of this essay is threefold. In the first part, I focus on Derrida's critique of the metaphysics of presence in traditional autobiography to develop an understanding of his notion of autobiography. It's actually with an O, not an AU. Derrida exposes the originary breach in the interiority of the autobiographer and demonstrates that the entanglement of self and alterity disrupts the desire for self-presence in autobiography. In the second part, I discuss the intersection between philosophy and autobiography to elucidate the grafting potential of language, which overflows the boundaries established by generic protocols and turns writing into a practice that locates its source in self-differentiating textual operations. In the third and final part, I focus on a reading of monolingualism of the other, or the prosthesis of origin, which is at once an autobiographical and philosophical work to show how Derrida's theories of selfhood, language, and writing work themselves out in practice. Derrida's work on autobiography raises a number of questions that are central to current conversations in the field of life studies. I think you're checking. Life studies, as Lee Gilmore notes in her introduction to autobiography and postmodernism. While, this is a quote from Lee Gilmore, actually a name I heard before, while on the one hand most traditional critics of autobiography have sought to argue for the autobiography's generic coherence and historical continuity in order to win some space in the tightly contested arena of literary studies. many postmodern explorations, on the other hand, seek to do without or do away with the definitional heft and limits provided by the genre theory. As a non-traditional autobiography, monolinguism leads to a similar inquiry about the genre theory. Furthermore, Derrida's works explores the notion of self-autonomy and relational identity, and thus contributes to the existing scholarship on autobiography advanced by scholars like Susan Egan, Paul John Ekin, where Egan states that autobiography, quote, adjusts self-definition in order to accommodate unexpected or original relations with others, end of quote. Ekin approaches rationality through social connectivity in his book, How Our Lives Become Stories, Making Selves. Ekin studies a number of narratives such as Leslie Marmont's Silko's Storyteller, whose, quote, transmission of other people's stories that are in turn versions of a shared body of myths and legends, is properly understood as an act of self-definition, and points to, quote, an increasingly large components of, another quote within the quote, we experience in the I narratives. While these critics debunk the autonomous self by focusing primarily on relations with others, Derrida places emphasis on interpersonal as well intrapersonal alterity, such as the ironic opening between two interlocutors. Sorry, hard to pronounce. Textual and extra-textual selves. The addresser and the addressee. Finally, monolinguism is concerned with testimony and the tension between truth and fiction, two issues that are crucial to the ongoing debates in the field of life writing studies, as evident in Sidoni Smith and Julia Watson's essay Witness or False Witness, and Lee Gilmore's recent book Tainted Witness. There are currently two seminal texts that study the centrality of autobiography to Derrida's writing. One is Robert Smith's 1995 Derrida and Autobiography, and wow,
this one.
Excellent, very good. Here we have it by Robin Smith. Seems to be a young chap.
He was young in 95.
Ah, he wasn't young in 95, okay. Well, a scrapping young fellow. And then we also have this by Jacques Derrida. This is the object of attention. Monolinguism of the other, or the prosthesis of origin. And you who become alarmed by these words, trust me, once you got into Derrida, this actually makes sense in some ways. I get a sense directly when I hear the word prosthesis of origin. It's like an extra limb for where it should be an original limb.
Lim, what do you mean, lim?
Lim.
Lim, yeah, thank you. Yes.
Maybe it should be pronounced limb. I'm not sure. I think it's limb actually. I don't know. Actually don't know. Placing it in a dialogue with other continental philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, Søren Kierkegaard and Paul de Man. I just had to mention this is a strange coincidence. I partied, or whatever that's called, a person who became 50 years old yesterday, and he talked a lot about Kierkegaard actually. And there was especially an expression from Kierkegaard: to leap into faith is to throw oneself off a rock where the distance underneath is 1,000 leagues. And we openly discussed this. I know earlier discussions I had with this chap, because he's a philosophy teacher at Swedish high school. He's very analytical, which goes without saying in Sweden. The analytical school of philosophy is incredibly dominant. I would say there is no country on this earth where analytical philosophy is stronger than Sweden. It's 100% in all areas of education. So for us to have an open discussion is quite rare, usually clash, but this time it wasn't a problem. And I think it's mainly thanks to the progress we made the last 100 essays or 100 lectures. So we could willingly discuss, and I could actually agree that in a way this throwing oneself after 1,000 leagues cleft is also an act of desperation. And that might be one of those things that makes it possible for us, readers of Kierkegaard, to classify Kierkegaard as the first existentialist. Sorry for the digression. And then we have Paul de Man, one of my heroes, who first got attacked and then he was saved by his friend and inspirer Jacques Derrida. And he was more or less condoned to the fire, like otobiographies, because being a pro-Nazi in post-war Belgium, nothing. It's the most horrendous fate you can have. And it's actually something that our friend Jan testified about. His grandfather was actually a pro-Nazi. And that's the reason Jan still to this day uses another name to sort of differentiate himself from the grandfather. He was also lucky enough to have a grandfather who was supporting the Allies and did a good help. But still, it didn't seem to be enough. And I think once wars are finished, we try to, to exaggerate the differences a bit. And I think the accusations of Paul de Man had a little bit of this exaggeration. It's so easy to, after the fact, accuse somebody for doing evils. It's very hard to stand up and be told within the evils. I would say that's even impossible, almost impossible. But it can happen. And I would say very important for this process to be able to stand tall when there is a turmoil around you is deconstruction. Otherwise, there is no chance of being an individual. He argues that for Derrida, autobiography is not so much a literary genre as a general condition of writing that disturbs conventional conceptions of life and death. Chronic's article focuses on the relationship between philosophy and autobiography. He studies the problem of reflexivity in the first half of the essay and moves to an analysis of Augustine's Confessions and Derrida's Circumfessions, name I love, in the second half. While Chronics and Smith's works offer comprehensive accounts of the place of the autobiography in Derrida's work, their focus remains on questions and texts that are different from the ones studied in this essay. Neither Chronic nor Smith's analyze monolinguism. This essay contributes to existing scholarship by focusing on a text that has received relatively little attention, and by approaching autobiography studies through a philosophical perspective that can radically alter our understanding of identity in writing. So I'm heading into the next paragraph here. Sorry to reading directly from the paper, but as a start, it's sometimes very, very good. Next paragraph has a sublining, the obstacle of auto-exposition. Although the question of autobiography is present in many of Derrida's texts, and his entire oeuvre can be read as an analysis of the signature, four works in particular capture our attention with regard to the incursion of the autobiographical subject. The first one is Glass, then we have Circumfession, Monolinguism of the other, here, The Animal That Therefore I Am. Actually, it's a piece of paper I never touched in my life. Sounds very interesting. Among these four texts, monolinguism is perhaps the most personal, and as it focuses on the acculturation Derrida underwent as a Jewish boy in Algeria when it still was a French colony. It is both a philosophical treatise and a semi-autobiographical excursions that questions the limits of our ownership of language and identity. Derrida combines theoretical reflection with historical particularity and foregrounds his own relationship to French language and culture. He offers a phenomenological description of the complexities and ironies of writing and identity we often overlook because of our idealistic tendencies. In the epilogue to monolinguism, Derrida defines his engagement with this text in terms of what makes the engagement problematic. So here we have a quote, page 70 from Monolinguism. Begins with what?
What I'm sketching?
Yes!
What I'm sketching here is, above all, not the beginning of some autobiographical or anamnestic outline, nor even a timid essay toward an intellectual Bildungsroman. Rather than an exposition of myself, it is an account of what will have placed an obstacle in the way of this auto-exposition for me. An account, therefore, of what will have exposed me to that obstacle and thrown me against it, of a serious accident about which I never cease thinking.
It's good. Okay. Cheers. Thank you very much, Kalle. Placing emphasis on the obstacle to auto-exposition, Derrida echoes the tone of the entire text. He hints at the complications that arises on the way to dream to the dream of an idiomatic writing, suggesting that despite our desire for an absolute self-presence, a strict autobiography is impossible. Derrida's engagement with the autobiographical theory can first and foremost be understood as a reaction to the radical autonomy assigned to the subject in the self-reflexive analysis of modern European philosophy. As Rudolf Gachet writes in The Chain of the Mirror, Derrida and the history of reflection. From the moment that it became a key methodological concept for Cartesian thought, reflection signified a certain principle of philosophical thinking. Quote from the book, by lifting the ego out of its immediate entanglement in the world and by thematizing the subject of thought itself, Descartes establishes the apodictic certainty of self as a result of the clarity and the distinctiveness with which it perceives itself. End of quote. It is a major problem. Well, it's not even a problem, it's just a lot of complications, so to speak. And it's an odd thing with the reflection, because in the beginning, when I was thinking of reflection and the reflection I could do on my own thinking and so forth, I actually fell directly for the very trap that Derrida and Gachet warns us about. And that's the immediate reflection. And the immediate idea that what looks into the mirror is some sort of, how to describe it, some sort of radical otherness, much more radical than the otherness I mentioned before. It is of a completely different kind. And once you got used to that idea, it is very hard to let loose of it. And I don't think you can actually. But what you can do is understand how it developed in yourself. And this is an autobiographical journey. For me, in my case, it was. Only I could do that. I can have help from other people in many circumstances, intellectual, practical, but with this very thing, one needs to do the journey oneself. You're left alone, and you have to go all the way into the past, sort of, when you were really young, even before the age of, possibly even before the age of speech. I'm not sure. Because this was so ingrained in my whole body and soul and spirit. It was every grain of my system. I think it was actually pre-verbal. Already before I began to speak, I had this simplified idea of reflection, and it remained in my system until the day I read Rudolf Gachet, and I started to ponder about it. So Gachet nor Derrida gives us more than the tools to do the work. But that is in itself not a little. It's incredible. So happy I had this coffee today. It's well needed on a really tough day. Let me give you an example of a friend. I didn't meet him yesterday. I met him several years ago. His name is Henry. And he said at one time when I chose coffees, and he said, it doesn't matter what coffee you choose. The stimulation comes from the ingredient caffeine in the coffee. So you can choose any coffee. And I realized he was wrong. But I didn't realize how he was wrong. So I was left with just a silly reply from my part. I just said, no, it's not like that, I said. And I tried to be convincing. But actually, I didn't really manage to even convince myself, which is often the problem in these cases. If you can't convince yourself, it will be very hard to convince others. I think that's a lesson that should be learned from Monday with the big lecture we had. And I wasn't convinced myself. Now I am convinced. It is not the same coffee. It's not due to caffeine. I know everybody would say that, and they would have a sort of an exception in their mental sphere where they really enjoy better coffee. But very few people actually go to that degree and tell themselves there's no use buying expensive and nice coffee. Let's just drink instant coffee or something like that. Because all we are after is the caffeine. Nonsense, I would say. There is a big difference between the coffee in stimulation as well. It is sheer nonsense, but I fell for it myself, so I can't point fingers to him. And I was actually liberated by Rodolphe Gasquet. I would have remained into that cage the rest of my life. Trust me, I'm not lying to you. I would have remained in the cage of direct reflection. And all I would have to be doing the rest of my life would be to criticize. And that's, I realize now, it's a useless weapon or a very weak weapon. It's like hitting somebody over the face with a straw. It's not really worth anything. Or throwing sawdust at an army, or trying to escape a bear hunting you by running. You know what happens if you run away from a bear? Kalle?
You might be killed.
You will be killed because the bear...
I'm very fast.
Very fast. But it's often a normal reaction when you meet a bear in the woods. It's to run away from it. Another reaction that is slightly better is to climb up a tree. But both those actions will get you killed, because the more you flee from a bear, the more sure it is that you will sort of trigger his attack mechanism or hunting mechanism. By running away from the bear, you will make yourself into a prey, and a bear is a predator. Don't ever run away from a bear. It will outrun you, and it will also outclimb you. I've seen a bear once climb up a tree. It was in Borås djurpark, but I was shocked how fast it was. I couldn't even believe my eyes. It looked like it ran up the tree. What you do with a bear is you don't fall for the self-reflection. And I would say, if you don't understand Rodolphe Gasquet and Derrida when it comes to self-reflection, you are bound to be an instinctual creature. Because what I realized when I looked deep into myself and how the idea of reflection once started, I also realized it's an instinct. It's not deep thinking. And I don't say that because I was very young when I adopted it. I think most people are. It had nothing to do with my intellectual level being very low. It is a body thing. It's an embodied, it's a reality-bound thing. It doesn't have much to do with language. Although it could be expressed in language, it doesn't start in language. And this is very important. Do remember this. It's pre-conceptual to a certain degree. It's like the Necker cube. And you cannot combat it by arguing in your head. You really need to get into your own body and understand what it is. Because what Derrida and Rodolphe Gasquet is, leads you to the water, to the lake, or I would say this is a marvelous oasis in the desert. And the water is there, but it's for you to drink it. you need to do the last effort yourself. It will not come to you just by normal understanding. You have to go a little bit further. Let me tell you a joke to exemplify the whole thing. I was actually thinking of telling this joke Monday, but because the atmosphere got a bit tensed, it wasn't time to tell that thing. And I wanted to start my questioning with this joke. I'll tell it now instead. It was this old rabbi living in New York, and he was a very, very dutiful rabbi. He served the Lord conscientiously all his life. But at his olden age, he had a wish. He wanted to go on a journey to Israel. He didn't have any money. So he said to the Lord, he prayed, went on his knee and he prayed to the Lord, Lord, you know I've been a humble servant to you all my life. I've done everything for you. Could you please grant me the honor of having some money so I could go to Israel? And the rabbi repeated the prayer a couple of times and he waited. And after a week, he was still not rich. So he prayed again, went on his knee, dear Lord, grant me the money. Nothing happened. On the third week, in a dream, the Lord appeared to him. Oh, dear Lord, there you are, the rabbi said faithfully. What can I do you for? Well, it's about the money you wanted. Yes, said the rabbi. Well, the thing is, said the Lord, you have to meet me halfway. You have to buy a lottery ticket. So this is to exemplify we have to be active. Nothing comes without our activation. And since we sort of ended up in passivity, this is what I did when I was 4 years old or 3 years old, I don't know. It's a sort of passivity. It's lack of reaction somehow, or wanting, willingness, intention. I don't know how to describe it, but it's even more than that. I would say this, that I call intention. It is part of nature. And I, by my, so to speak, mistake, I blundered. I shut my eyes, my ears, my sensing, my thinking to that understanding. And it was it's an understanding coming from reality. We can all confirm it. And of course, it's easy to say here now, but this is very important when it comes to such a sensuous and sensitive theme as your own autobiography. Will you be able to reflect? Well, I would say no. If you are stuck in the mirror image, you can't reflect on your life. It would be an untrue story. And it doesn't matter if you write it too negative about your own life or too positive on your life. It doesn't matter. It will always already be false. No matter what words you put in, it will be false. And that's pretty horrendous destiny. Let me repeat this because this is so important. By lifting the ego of its immediate entanglement in the world and by themizing the subject of thought itself, Descartes established the apodictic certainty of self as a result of the clarity and the distinctness with which it perceives itself. This is incredibly important, and this is actually, I don't remember his name, it's a Turkish name, Meliz, whatever that is. He actually picks out a key point here, and I would say it's very hard from this only point to understand the whole thing, but it's a very good start. It was a clever pick, I would say. Listen to this. Self-reflection, quote again, makes the human being a subjectivity that has its center in itself, a self-consciousness certain of itself, end of quote. It constitutes the autonomy of the cogito, of the subject of thought. Liberum est quod causa sui est. Only the subject that knows itself, and thus finds the center of all certitude in itself, is free. Quote from Gachet. To that end, in modern philosophy since Descartes, the autonomy of the subject who turns upon itself for absolute reflection has represented an ideal on the way to individual freedom. The autobiographical tradition has been informed by a similar scope of self-reflexivity and self-certitude as found in the philosophical tradition. Historically, autobiography as self-life writing has been perceived as a genre that grants the author the right to affirm a unique identity as his property. As Bella Szabados remarks, quote from Bella Szabados, traditional autobiography can be seen as depending on a certain picture of self-knowledge, on a certain picture of mind whose dimensions have been elaborated by Descartes and scores of philosophers of mind. This picture has as its feature, quote, privileged access, end quote, to the contents of our minds, epistemological solitude, and final, incorrigible authority over the first person psychological utterances. End of the whole side from Bella Szabados. Seen from this perspective, autobiography is built on three distinct pillars: a self, an autos, a set of chronologically related empirical events, and the facts of the subject's life, bios, and the inscription of the life story, graphe. The autobiographer is concerned with recalling a transparent self that exists prior to the produced text. All outward movement returns to the self-enclosed subjectivity of the author, and essence consummates itself through teleological development. Nota bene, I said teleological, that goal-oriented development. And in a nutshell, if you can't reach into self-reflectivity or understand how you can stand outside of your own life and look at it, which I could not do before Rodolphe Gachet, it's impossible for me, your story will be untrue. But what is the cure for this lack of truthness? How do I cure it, and how do everyone cure it? This is a hint coming from me, not from the Meliz Ergin or Rodolphe Gachet. It's something I came up with. How do we try to cure it? It's like we give ourselves a pharmacon to fix it. Presence. Presence is our pharmacon. This is how we try to fix the subjectivity, and we are at a level actually aware of this subjectivity, and our cure for that is presence. seeking to presence. And if I were to write an autobiography of my own life, or just as an example, before Gachet I would have had to center it around some things to make it objective. And I would establish a polarity early on, truth and untruth. And instead of telling the story in a faithful, loyal, morally good manner, I would have to succumb to polarities, which in a way is a sort of lying, deceitfulness. But I would not have any other option. Metaphysics of presence is the cure, I thought, or we think, but it is not a cure. But giving it up won't help the situation, because it's already established. So you be damned if you do, and you be damned if you don't. Sorry, Kalle, you wanted to... Okay. I will have to continue with this. This was rather interesting. So I just end with this little pointer here. There is a reason for the metaphysics of presence, and the cure is not to give it up. Never. Because it's not a thing to be cured. You are somewhere at some certain level aware that your words or other things don't mean that much. They are not truthful in a way. They are not from the heart. So you already always put in the polarity somehow as a sort of a prothesis from not being able to express yourself truthfully from your heart. This is a rather sentimental take on the whole thing I mentioned here, but maybe it could be a helper actually. I think it could actually be a good indication, because I did know when I realized that I took that direct reflection, I also realized I've been dishonest my whole life to a certain degree. Because once you are stuck with that, honesty cannot prevail. You can never ever be honest. And that is actually not the point from Derrida or Rudolf Gachet. That's the point coming from Nietzsche. And it's a little bit beside the point, I think, Derrida and Gachet and the author of this article would say. But I actually think it's a good hint. So take it or leave it. So do whatever you want with it. But that's coming from me. Well, I say thank you very much this lovely afternoon. I will make another lecture about the same interesting theme. And I say also thank you, Kalle, once more. Elegant and masterwork. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.